All right, we got a new great treat for you for this episode, Emprise Consulting Corner. I'd like to welcome Galit Cohen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, anytime. Galit is an expert in emotional intelligence, self-proclaimed expert maybe, or she has the background, so we'll get into that later. She has an article published on Thrive Global, which is interesting because it's a website that I've frequented a lot just through LinkedIn, and just has some cool topics and things that are important to me, like health and emotional intelligence, which is something we're gonna talk about today. So welcome again, and maybe can you tell a little bit about yourself, and emotional intelligence is the topic, like I mentioned, and maybe go into that a little bit.
Sure. Well, my name's Galit. It's like delete, but with a G, in case anybody needs some tips on how to say it. And I coach leaders on how to enhance their emotional intelligence, so how to manage their own emotions and how to use the emotions of their colleagues, subordinates to perform excellence, essentially. I got into emotional intelligence pretty much when I was born, but I didn't have the knowledge of what it was. Obviously, as a baby, I come from a multicultural household. My mom's Bolivian, my dad's Israeli. So having two very different cultures, and growing up in the States, I had a sort of hybrid home of three different cultures. So unknowingly, I learned to switch emotional frequencies very quickly. So I always learned to listen to how somebody was like, their language, not literally like Hebrew or Spanish, but the way somebody communicated, the way they thought. And that's how I went into just general life, connecting with other people really quickly. But the funny thing is that I didn't know that they had accents until I was like in the 4th grade and somebody pointed it out. So I didn't know that I was picking up on this ability to quickly code switch with all different people, until people pointed it out to me. And then as I grew older, I just became more and more aware of it, and now I'm coaching other people to do the same.
Oh, cool. That's interesting. I wasn't really aware of emotional intelligence of the term for really my whole life until maybe the last 5-6 years, where at Emprise we actually hired a company, probably like yourself, that came in and trained leaders, and you learned about it and learned more about yourself and people and how to communicate with them. And I was like, oh, this is powerful stuff, and it's very interesting to me personally. I think it's one of those things where some people took a lot from it, some people took some stuff, and some people maybe just, this isn't for me, which is fine.
Yeah.
What do you have? What's your standard definition of what emotional intelligence is for people who haven't heard of it before?
Okay, so I have kind of 2 standard definitions. One is the ability to manage your emotions and the emotions of others, to recognize and manage them. And then the even simpler version is basically using your emotions to work for you instead of against you. That
sounds good. The one thing I remembered, a lot of things from our classes, and the one term that always comes to my head is don't get emotionally hijacked. I don't know if that's something that you coach, but when you're gonna speak, I'm not a good public speaker by any means, but taking those deep breaths, don't get emotionally hijacked by the situation. And it was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's not just all in my head. There's an actual thing.
Oh yeah, it's an actual thing. It's in your head, it's in your body. And those emotional hijacks are like the best time to course correct if you enhance your emotional awareness, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little.
Yeah, definitely. No, we have those examples, thinking with the clients we work with, or even just internal emails, when you see a message, an email, or even talking to someone where it kind of crosses you the wrong way. And I know some people used to fire off a response email or just talking with someone, and it's taught me, it's like, okay, go back to that email in 30 minutes. See what they were really trying to get at. Were they really trying to attack you, or are you just reading it that way?
Yeah, that's a great self-awareness and challenging assumptions.
So I thought of a question. We didn't really do much prep, which is how I like it. Why is it called EQ when there's no Q in emotional intelligence?
So it's also called emotional quotient. So emotional intelligence, like intelligence quotient, Yeah.
Gotcha. I was going to search for it. I was like, no, this will be perfect to ask. I really have no clue.
Yeah.
So you have your own business called EQ Evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe give some examples, whether it's with yourself or I know you can't probably work clients for like NDA reasons, of just how you help them and with like themselves or maybe even within the businesses they run or you run?
Yeah, absolutely. So one example, kind of based off what you were just talking about, is managing their emotions and becoming more aware of when that emotional hijack is sort of happening. So if a client is getting regularly very stressed out in meetings and lashing out on their team, like this is like the most extreme example, what is it, at what point are they starting to kind of feel that in their physical body, that kind of tenseness, that like maybe a little bit of a headache, where the next second they're yelling at everybody or they're blaming people? Were they feeling unheard? Were they feeling unacknowledged? Did somebody not do the work that the leader asked them to do? And then why did they not do that? So it's becoming aware of the thought that is creating that physiological response, which is then causing you to lash out and harm relationships and harm business. So that is one way, becoming more aware of your feelings and how to respond in a more appropriate manner. So if you're starting to feel yourself getting hot, maybe that's your signal that is not the best time to talk. Maybe you need to be taking a couple deep breaths. Maybe you actually don't need to speak in that meeting. That's just not the appropriate time. You need to go on a walk and talk later. But those are like the more negative emotions. There's also times where people are extremely happy and they're just saying yes to everything. So it's also taking the time to be aware of, I'm feeling really happy and I kind of want to say yes to everything, but I just said yes to everything and next month rolls around and you're working 80-hour weeks and everything is just like falling apart because you just don't have the time to manage it. So just taking a step back from what you're feeling before making those decisions. Another area is, like I mentioned a little bit before, is challenging assumptions. So like you mentioned with the email situation, if you read an email and you think that somebody was attacking you or something like that, that comes up a lot with clients too, where they're assuming that their subordinates or teammates are thinking one way and they're treating them. So let me try to get a more concrete example. So for example, you think your teammate did not do their part of the project because it was boring and they didn't want to. But the teammates actually didn't have clear communication on that was part of the project, or they didn't know how to do it. So you're treating them negatively, passive aggressively, because you think like they just didn't want to do their part, and they're getting defensive because you're being passive aggressive towards them. But their reality is they didn't know that that's what you wanted because the communication wasn't clear. So instead of assuming why people aren't doing things the way you want to do things, ask them questions like, hey, have you gotten around to doing that? I thought we talked about this, maybe it wasn't clear. Like, figure out where the miscommunication is, because ultimately we all have our own versions of reality, and if we're not asking questions, we're not going to be able to match each other's. I could give more examples, but I'll just
examples are good. I think stories, examples help people understand. I know, communication is, I think everybody knows that it's super important, but man, the older I get, the more interaction, the more professional, I guess, client relationships I have with clients and internally with our staff. Communication is huge. You can never really over communicate. And being accountable is huge too. There's a great book. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but Jocko, I don't know if you know Jocko Willnick. He's a ex-Navy SEAL, but Extreme Ownership is a book that he has out, and it's just be accountable for everything. It's pretty easy once you do that, but actually mean it, not just I'll take the blame, but
totally.
There's a lot more that goes into that. So no, those examples are great. Trying to think of what else, kind of in my mind to help the people that are watching and listening. How do you typically use EQ to influence people more in a positive way?
Well, if we're talking about in an organizational setting, typically you want if you are trying to influence some sort of positive change, you need to present it to the stakeholders in a way that's benefiting them. So that's where empathy comes in quite a bit. You need to understand how they're talking, how they're thinking, and how your idea can benefit them. So if you're just coming to the table with like your ideas and not thinking of how they think, their communication, their values, it's not going to be super effective. So this isn't a personal story or anything, but with Nike, before, don't quote me on everything, but I think they went more like eco-friendly. And so it was a couple of the designers that were interested in getting more eco-friendly, but it wasn't going anywhere with the presenting to the stakeholders. But what they realized is one of Nike's key values is being different, being unique, being the first ones to do something. And other sneaker companies were not leading the boat with being like eco-friendly. So when they presented it in a manner of, hey, this actually fits in with our values and our brand of like, we're going to be the first ones to do this, we're going to do things differently, people started listening, and then communication started happening and more conversations were open.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You gotta sometimes take it at different angles too, and spin it a little bit. You brought up empathy, which I know is, well, at least I know it's been a big thing in the last few years. You're seeing all the, whether people are motivational quoters or speakers, whatever, they're doing. I like the term empathy. I think a lot of people overuse it. I talked to my wife a lot about it, and that term's like, you need to be more empathetic. I'm like, I'm trying. So can you develop empathy? That's leading into my question here. And do you have tips if you can?
Yes, you can absolutely develop empathy. You have to put in the work. It's not something that's simple, but you can. And there's a couple ways to do it. Are playing devil's advocate. If you're somebody that's into that, just always try. You can watch a movie, take the perspective of a different character and kind of try to argue that sort of case. Again, it kind of just goes back to seeing things from the perspective of someone else. That's more cognitive empathy. There's emotional empathy where you're actually feeling their feelings, but watching movies, listening to music that elicits any sort of like emotion, trying to connect things from another person's perspective once again. But yeah, empathy is crucial to, actually Google did a study in a Project Aristotle, and they found that empathy is one of the 2 factors that make the highest functioning teams.
Yeah, I could see that. We've had some bad apples. I think most companies have. And now we're in like a really great spot. And I think that there's a lot of pieces to that, but I think that's important for any relationship, any company, any person.
Yeah. To
really have and understand it. Kind of like you said, I like to put myself in their shoes. Have you heard anything, just curious, studies or just in general personal experience of, you're more empathetic to almost like non-family members? I've seen that kind of where you're almost so close to somebody that it's easy, maybe you're more comfortable with them to maybe like lash out or do, not be as empathetic as you are to maybe you and me, we know each other, but we're not best friends.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll be more empathetic to you than my neighbor who I've talked to, for 5 years.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily empathy, but you have that rapport and the trust with the family member. So you kind of you probably have that history of, I've lashed out at you and you've forgiven me and you still love me. So you have that foundational, like, we're still going to love each other probably, versus that you have the potential to ruin a reputation and the rapport with your neighbor or me, if we're screaming at each other. So yeah. I think it's less empathy and more sort of trust in the relationship, I think.
Maybe you're taking advantage of, well, I yelled at you once, so I'm going to yell at you again, even if I don't mean it. Not that I'm advocating for that. So back to emotional intelligence in general, do you see any negatives or downsides to it? Yeah,
well, not necessarily like downsides, but you can have like an empathy overload where you're only seeing things from another person's perspective and you're not holding them accountable in certain areas. So if you're a manager and you really have like the soft spot for one of your teammates or subordinates and they just they're just not showing up to any meeting on time, 30 minutes late after, you've talked to them a couple times, they had like a personal emergency, you understand, but it just keeps happening, it just keeps happening, it just keeps happening, and that's affecting business. At a certain point, like if your empathy for whatever is going on in their life is overpowering what's going on in the business, it's actually hurting you a little bit more, so you need to separate a little bit.
Right, so you're almost kind of making excuses for them, letting them slide, and yeah, no, that makes sense.
And the other,
I didn't really think of any examples when I was asking that question, so it's good. It's good. I was like, could there be negatives? Yeah, I guess there could be, but hopefully during that communication with that person, you have a nice conversation, and they're like, oh yeah, maybe I was not intentionally taking advantage of the situation, but no, I still want to be held accountable for my work.
Yeah, and that person might be using their like emotional intelligence for the evil, to be influencing other people. People use it quite a bit for manipulation, whether it's, a business deal or convincing your teammate that they should be taking the notes in the meeting or something like that. But the more you develop your own emotional awareness, the more you're going to be able to see those sort of manipulation tactics in others. So that's why it's important too. Yeah,
yes. And I don't know if it's happened to us in the past, but we sometimes get a lot of clients that, if it's almost like the bait and switch, potentially, maybe whoever they signed with used empathy or some sort of tactics to get them to sign up as a client. And then, once they're a client, now they're not happy with them because maybe the true person comes out and you're like, wait, this isn't who you were. This isn't what we talked about. I don't know if that's similar, but I could see that if you're talking manipulation.
Yeah, well, that's the best way to ruin a relationship, right?
Exactly.
Mask and not following through on what you promised.
I know some people just like sales and don't care about the relationship, which I don't want to work with any of those people, because I'm all about the relationships, and that's what we are too. So, and I know that's how you are.
Yeah.
So people now know what emotional intelligence is, some examples. If they want to develop it, obviously we can get into kind of at the end of this of, your business and how to get in touch with you and to talk with you, but how would you develop your EQ? What are some examples or some ways?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. Like I mentioned earlier, for empathy, you can play that sort of devil's advocate with characters in movies. Journaling is a free and simple way to practice, to get to know yourself a little bit better. If you're reflecting on your day, the thing is that we, like as people, we go through life reacting, and we don't often take a lot of time to reflect on why we reacted, which means that we can't course correct things that we don't like. So if your meetings are never going well because you're constantly blowing up and you're not reflecting on what is triggering that blow up, you can't fix it, and nobody's going to end up at your side. So say you're constantly getting mad in one certain situation at work, journal it out, figure out what the root cause of that anger is, and then deal with that so that it's not affecting your work and your relationships anymore. Again, watching movies, listening to music sort of elicits that sort of feeling.
Yeah.
And getting feedback from your friends and peers, people that you're close with, how they perceive you, because we can only see one version of ourselves. Our friends and family and colleagues have to expose those blind spots sometimes.
Yeah, that last piece, I think we did that exercise, doing an honest evaluation of the couple people that are also in the class with you, which is always fun to hear feedback on yourself, no matter good or bad. I think that's important, and kind of always going back to that accountability part. If you're blowing up in meetings and you're just blaming everybody else, I would hope at some point you'd realize it or somebody would say something, but that's kind of why people like yourself exist and have these companies is, hopefully people are interested in changing themselves and can actually self-reflect and say, yeah, I do have an anger issue. I do tend to blame other people opposed to self-reflecting. So those are some good examples. So for your business, what type of clients do you see? Do you do it in groups or individual? Do you go into organizations, or how you may describe a little bit more about kind of what you're looking for, your ideal clientele?
Yeah. So, well, I'm working on my first group program. I have not officially launched that yet, but it'll be a group leadership development program around soft skills. So stay tuned for that. But right now I work with clients one-on-one, different levels of leadership. Some people who are not in that official authoritative position, they're looking to get into leadership or looking to, learn ways to influence. And then, yeah, I do go into organizations sometimes and give presentations.
Okay, cool. No, that's what we had. There was a local person here in Ohio where we had somebody come in for like 6 or 8 of us, but now with tech, that was pre all the COVID and web meetings being a regular thing. So I could see conducting it this way as well. Probably worked perfectly fine for everybody. So are there any courses, or I know you probably have some content or white papers, or is there any, where do you want people to go to read more about you, your offerings, also just, kind of stay in touch with you?
Yeah, well, you can go to my website, eq-evolution.com. You can email me, Galit-EQ. No, at eq-evolution.com. For some reason, I always mess up that dash. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Galit F, as in Frank, Cohen.
All right, cool. Yeah, I will put all that in the YouTube notes here. What else do you want to talk about? Anything, any parting words, whether it's EQ related, not? Anything fun you want to talk about?
I can end with a kind of funny story about empathy and sort of emotional regulation with a supervisor.
Okay.
And just like the power that emotional intelligence has on people and how it's lasting. A couple years ago, I had joined a company, and within a month, they were like, "You're going to Uganda to assist in this training." And I was like, okay, cool. I didn't even know there was travel involved in this job, but like, sign me up.
Perfect.
Clearly, within a month, you don't learn everything about a company's culture, but you can pick up on some stuff. I was responsible for packing all of our equipment. Fast forward to we're in Uganda, and the lead trainer, because we were there training a workshop, looks at me and she's like, "You only have 10 markers. Like, we need at least 50 more markers, like by tomorrow." Like, we had just landed in Kampala, Uganda the day before, and I was completely disoriented, already working. I didn't know anything, and I was like, she was kind of freaking out. So I was like, "Don't worry, I will get the 50 markers by tomorrow." I had no idea how I was going to get them, but I knew I was going to get them. So the next day, like we worked till pretty late that night, and I kind of like didn't forget about the markers, but I also couldn't find them. So the next day rolls around, and she's like, "We need markers," and I was like, "Okay." So I just turned around and I left, and I was like, "I'm gonna walk down the street, this little dirt road, and I'm gonna find markers." Very nice man, Demi, who actually worked at the place that we were having the workshop, was like, "I'll come with you. I'll help you out. I'm a local." I was like, "Okay, great." So we go to this little, like kind of dollar store, and they have markers, and it's fantastic. But I had it had barely been 48 hours that I was in Uganda, and I didn't have shillings. I only had a credit card. They didn't take a credit card, and he's like, "It's okay. We'll cross the street and we'll get shillings." And my face just like went white, because if you've ever been to Kampala, the roads are not like crossing the street here. I mean, I have traveled quite a bit, and I always get nervous with crossing the street, but I'm in heels because I'm in the middle of training, like an event.
Right.
And he's still talking to me, and I'm like, "Demi, I'm so sorry, I'm listening to you," because I didn't want him to feel like I was ignoring him. "I'm just feeling a little bit afraid, but only to cross the street, because this is like a scene out of Disney's Mulan, like where the grandma crosses the street with the cricket with her eyes closed, because they have these little like motorcycles. Many of them get around on these motorcycles called boda bodas. It's a very small road, but people are going like 50 different directions. It's very, very chaotic. I'm in heels. It's in the dirt, and I'm scared." And I just told him, and he was so calm, and he just looks at me and he's like, "I can tell," like basically like insinuating, "You don't have to be sorry for not paying attention to me. I can sense your fear." And he's like, "If I was in your country, maybe I would feel afraid too to cross the street." And I was like, "Well, I kind of feel like maybe you feel less afraid than me right now, but I really appreciate you giving me that, like feeling my pain." So we start.
We look left and right, and then we cross. There's probably a lot more of that than you're about to get into.
And we have a little, like, usually there's like a little button that tells us we can walk right now. It's like a little bit less scary, but I'll take it. So we start crossing the street. I think probably halfway through, I just closed my eyes because I was so scared, and I grabbed his hand. I don't know, it was all instinctual. It was just like a fear reaction. And we cross the street and we get to the end, and I look down and I'm holding his hand. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't mean to invade your privacy. And he's like, don't worry. Like, I know you're afraid. Like, I got my shillings. We crossed the street again. But the minute we started, I closed my eyes and he already had his hand out. And it was like, it was just this tiny moment of somebody agreeing to come with me down the street, having the empathy to be like, I understand you're afraid. Don't worry about like explaining yourself. And you don't have to, like, don't feel bad about totally just violating my personal bubble by grabbing my hand. And that was, you know, several years ago, and we still keep in touch a little here and there on LinkedIn, but it's those little moments of humanity that are so touching that you will always remember. And like, if Demi was ever in the States, needed something, I'd have his back, because I remember like how much that moment touched me.
Oh, that's a good story. It makes you think. There is, with everything going on in the world, you know, there are good humans out there that want to make a difference and don't even think twice about offering help and being there for somebody. So that good story.
And it can I mean, that was out of work, but anything like that can happen in the workplace. Being empathetic, and by the way, I literally bought every single marker that was in the little shop. That was that person's lucky day. I was like, take all the shillings, give me the markers, like. Thank you.
I'm not coming back and doing this this real life Frogger moment for us older folk who know the Atari game Frogger. All right, well, that was good. So anything else? You know what? I have one question for you, but anything else you wanna share, talk about while I have you?
I mean, that's pretty much it. Everybody should know that we always have to use our emotional intelligence just as being humans. You might not know like the technical terms under the competencies, but just being a functioning human is using your emotional intelligence. And if you're either growing professionally or you're going personally, it affects both areas. That's the best thing about emotional intelligence, is if you're using it in a leadership role for work, it will help your personal life as well.
Oh, yep, sounds good. So here's my question. What Tool tune, or maybe what song in the summer when it comes on the radio, you have to roll your windows up and sing because you don't want people to hear you?
That I don't want people to hear me? Maybe when I'm back in DC, like Summer Nights by Rascal Flatts.
Okay. That's not a bad song. I always think of the songs like when I was 13, 14, like that's when like Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. And you're just a teen, and you're like, oh, I like all this stuff, and then it comes on now, and I know these words, but I'm not singing them. So that was a safe answer. I'll give you that. I was hoping for something maybe some like punk
rock stuff. I've kind of recently gotten back into that, and if you want a full confession, sometimes when I work out, I listen to Hannah Montana.
There you go. That was the truth. That's what we needed. Well, thanks, Galit. Anyone that wants to get a hold of her and increase your EQ or start learning a little bit more about it, definitely reach out. Everything will be in the notes on the YouTube and all over LinkedIn, and you're missing out if you don't get in touch with her. Thank you. It's great talking with you. All right, have a good one.